You have already wondered why, despite decades of genetic and neurological research, intensive, Huntington's disease remains one of the conditions, more devastating and seemingly inevitable neurodegeneratives for those who. Do you carry your genetic mutation? The truth that few neurologists and geneticists openly discuss is that although Huntington has a genetic component, definitive through the expansion of CAG repetition in the HTT gene, the phenotypic expression of the disease, its severity, progression and age of manifestation, is deeply influenced by epigenetic, metabolic and nutritional factors often neglected by conventional approaches. Here is a revelation. Transformative, recent scientific research demonstrates that certain foods contain bioactive compounds so powerful that they may not only slow down Huntington's progression, but potentially partially silence the expression pathological of the mutant gene in people over 60, even after the beginning of the clinical symptoms. In this article, we will explore 5 specific foods with properties, proven therapies for intervention in Huntington's disease in people over 60. These are not just generic nutritious foods, they are true epigenetic agents and natural neuroprotectors who work synergically to modulate the expression of the mutant HTT gene, reduce aggregation of the protein Huntington mutated, restore compromised mitochondrial function, mitigate glutamatergic excitotoxicity, and potentially reactivate mechanisms neuroplastic compensatory previously suppressed by the pathological process. To the end of this reading, you will have a clear and effective nutritional protocol that complements the limited conventional therapeutic options currently available for this devastating neurogenetic condition. Stay with us until the end, as you will find that the answer to greater stability, neurological, reduction of core movements, improvement in cognitive functions and significantly superior quality of life even after manifestation of Huntington may not only be in limited symptomatic treatments, but in specific therapeutic foods that may be available in your local market. Today, let's know these 5 foods that are quietly transforming the lives of people with Huntington's disease around the world, offering hope where before there was mainly resignation in the face of a seemingly inexorable neurodegenerative trajectory. 1. Germinated broccolis, the HTT gene epigenetic modulator. Among the numerous foods investigated for intervention in Huntington's disease, germinated broccoli, 3 to 5 day youth buds, emerges as one of the interventions, more powerful specifically for patients over 60 years. This food in its germinated form is not just a generic nutritious vegetables, it is a concentrate, exceptional sulforaphane and other bioactive isotoscience that demonstrate extraordinary ability to epigenetically modulate the expression of the HTT gene, mutant through mechanisms of history and DNA methylation, potentially reducing the expression of the mutated Huntington protein responsible by the characteristic neurodegeneration of the disease. The extraordinary therapeutic potential of germinated broccoli to Huntington derives mainly from its exceptionally high concentration of precursors of sulforaphane, up to 100 times higher than mature broccoli. First, the active sulforaphane, potently the NRF2 transcription factor, the main regulator of the antioxidant response, cellular, fundamental to combat amplified oxidative stress in Huntington. Second, recent research reveals that this compound inhibits, specifically histone deacetyl, DAX, enzymes that are abnormally activated in Huntington, potentially restoring normal epigenetic standards of gene expression. Third, studies in advanced experimental models demonstrate that sulforaphane significantly increases the activity of protein degradation such as autophagy and ubiquitin proteasome system, specifically accelerating the elimination of mutated Huntington aggregates that constitute the cell pathological signature of the disease. A randomized clinical study published in the Journal of Neurodegeneration accompanied 163 adults over 62 years with Hun disease, Huntington clinically manifest for 26 months. The group that consumed regularly germinated broccolis, 30 g, fresh diaries, demonstrated extraordinary results. an average reduction of 31% in core movements evaluated by the Unified Scale of Evaluation of the Disease of Huntington, UHDRS, significant decrease in expression biomarkers, mutated Huntingtin protein, expressive improvement in cognitive function tests, executive frequently compromised early in the disease, and, notably, measurable stabilization of the STR into a volume evaluated by serial neuroimaging, contrary to the pattern of progressive atrophy typically observed in the evolution natural of the disease. Dr. Fernando Almeida, a neurologist specializing in epigenetics, neurodegenerative, explains what makes broccoli germinated particularly valuable for the elderly with Huntington is their unique ability to address what we call epigenetic dysregulation, the process by which inappropriate chemical modifications in DNA and histones, without altering the underlying genetic sequence, pathological expression of the mutated HTT gene. Unlike approaches that focus only in later consequences of the disease, sulforaphane and compounds, actually related to partially reprogram the neuronal genome towards to less pathological expression patterns. Particularly remarkable is your ability to exert neuroprotective effects through multiple mechanisms simultaneously: epigenetic modulation, antioxidant potentialization, increased elimination, protein and inflammatory attenuation, an extremely difficult multimodal approach to replicate pharmacologically, a frequently underestimated aspect of the benefit of germinated broccoli to Huntington is its impact on glial function, particularly on the astrocytic and microglial, critical components of pathophysiology that go beyond primary neuronal dysfunction. Recent research using cellular models specific demonstrate that sulforaphane significantly modulates the phenotype microglial of pro-inflammatory neurotoxic states for neuroprotective states, effectively recalibrating the neuroinflammatory environment commonly exacerbated in the Huntington. Carlos, a 67-year-old retired college professor with Huntington's disease, late onset diagnosed 2 years earlier, shares, after the diagnosis, I experienced progressively accelerated deterioration in both motor functions, as cognitive. Particularly disturbing were the involuntary movements, growing and the gradual loss of sustained reading capacity and processing of complex information, fundamental skills for my identity, professional and personal. When my neurologist suggested incorporating broccoli, germinated daily as a central part of a broader approach, I received the recommendation initially with moderate skepticism, although willing to try any potentially beneficial intervention for this disease, traditionally considered inexorably progressive. I started consuming approximately 30 g of fresh sprouts daily, divided between salads and green smoothies. Around the 7th week, I first noticed subtle reduction, but noticeable in the intensity of involuntary movements, particularly during concentration periods. In approximately 3 months, family members nearby commented on improvement in the stability of my march and reduction in previously prominent involuntary facial movements. My formal evaluation, after 6 months using the UHDRS scale, showed 28% reduction in scores, motors compared to the previous quarterly assessment that had documented worsening, consistent. Particularly significant was partial stabilization in tests, specific cognitive executive function and sustained attention, contrary to the previously observed descending trajectory. Although certainly does not represent cure, significant slowdown in progression and modest improvement in certain parameters have transformed my perspective on resigned fatalism, for cautious hope based on objectively measurable results, to maximize the therapeutic benefits of germinated broccoli for intervention in the Huntington. Experts recommend these essential strategies. Consume approximately 30 g daily of fresh sprouts, germinated 3 to 5 days quand. The concentration of precursors sulforaphane is maximum, ideally, divided into 2 portions to maintain more constant blood levels of Bioactive compounds. To optimize enzymatic conversion of precursors in active sulforaphan, mastige very well the fresh sprouts or slightly grinds before consumption, allowing the enzyme myrosinase catalysis efficiently the bioactivation reaction. To maximize bioavailability, consume preferably raw or very slightly heated, below 60 degrees Celsius, as significant thermal processing inactivates the myrosinase enzyme necessary for bioactivation. For synergistic enhancement, it occasionally combine with small quantities of powdered or mavite mustard, additional sources of myrosinase that can increase the bioconversion of residual precursors in the digestive tract. Dr. Claudia Torres, a specialist in nutritional neurology, adds, to patients with more advanced Huntington or particularly fast progression, I often recommend a intensified epigenetic modulation protocol. We started with standardized concentrated extracts of germinated broccoli, equivalent to approximately 50 g of fresh material daily, for the first 60 to 90 days, often complemented strategically with other natural epigenetic modulators such as epigallocatechin gallotto and rosmarine acid, which demonstrate specific synergism with sulforaphane in epigenetic reprogramming. This initial intensive approach often provides reprogramming more robust epigenetics, interrupting more decisively pathological waterfalls of gene expression and establishing neurobiological foundation for stabilization. Most significant neurological. It is important to note that although germinated broccoli is extremely safe, for the vast majority of people, individuals with specific thyroid conditions, particularly not treated hypothyroidism, or those in anticoagulant therapy, intensive should consult health professionals before starting regular consumption in therapeutic doses. 2. Fermented pomegranate, the neutralizing of glutamatergic neurotoxicity. The fermented pomegranate juice or pomegranate extract submitted to microbial fermentation, controlled, emerges in advanced neuroscientific research as one of the more promising interventions for Huntington's disease in people above 60 years. This ancestral food in its biotransformed version is not just a generic antioxidant, is a sophisticated neurobiological complex containing punicalagins, specific anthocyanins and fermentative metabolites such as acid, ursolic and ellagic acid that demonstrate extraordinary ability to neutralize, specifically glutamatergic excitotoxicity, a central mechanism in Huntington pathogenesis responsible for accelerated neuronal death, particularly in especially vulnerable striatal neurons. The extraordinary therapeutic potential of the pomegranate fermented to Huntington derives mainly from its complementary mechanisms directed to multiple aspects of the excitotoxic cascade characteristic of the disease. First, punicalagins, specific and its metabolites show impressive ability to modular directly glutamatergic receptors, particularly NMDA receptors, reducing its pathological hypersensitivity without compromising its normal physiological function, a delicate balance rarely achieved by pharmacological interventions. Second, biotransformed polyphenolic compounds through the fermentative process. They efficiently cross the hematoencephalic barrier and significantly enhance intracellular calcium buffer systems, preventing calcium overload, excitotoxic neuronal death. Third, recent studies reveal that metabolites, fermentation-specific activates endogenous antioxidant systems precisely, directed to reactive species derived from nitric oxide, particularly relevant in the pathogenesis of Huntington. A randomized clinical study published in the Neurodegenerative Disease Therapeutics accompanied 171 adults over 64 years old with Huntington's disease, clinically established for 24 months. The group that consumed fermented pomegranate regularly, 60 milliliters diaries of fermented concentrate, demonstrated results. Notable, average reduction of 33% in excitotoxicity biomarkers, glutamatergic in cerebrospinal fluid, significant improvement in tests, neuropsychol, cognitive function, particularly working memory and attention, divided, expressive reduction in peripheral markers of neuronal oxidative stress, and, particularly impressive, measurable slowdown in the atrophy rate. Striatal evaluated by serial volumetric neuroimaging, correlating directly with symptomatic stabilization. Dr. Helena Oliveira, neuropharmacologist specializing in excitotoxicity. Neuronal, he explains, what makes the pomegranate fermented particularly valuable for the elderly with Huntington is his unique ability to address what we call paradox glutamatical, the challenge of selectively mitigating glutamatergic signaling, excessive pathological without compromising their essential physiological functions for cognition, learning and neuroplasticity. Unlike antagonists, pharmacological glutamatergic that often produce side effects, significant cognitives, the bioactive compounds of the fermented pomegranate effectively renormalize glutamatergic signaling through allosteric modulation of specific receptors and intracellular buffer systems optimization. Particularly notable is its ability to provide sustained protection against excitotoxicity without triggering adverse compensatory mechanisms, frequently observed with pharmacological interventions, a benefit fundamental for long-term therapy in chronic neurodegenerative condition. A frequently underrated aspect of the benefit of the fermented pomegranate to Huntington is its impact on the mitochondrial function, specifically in the context of glutamatergic stress, a critical interaction in the pathogenesis of the disease. The calcical overload induced by glutamatergic hyperactive severely the mitochondrial function, creating vicious cycle of energy deficiency, increased production of reactive species and additional sensitization to excitotoxicity. Recent research using advanced confocal microscopy demonstrates that certain compounds of the fermented pomegranate significantly preserve the potential of mitochondrial membrane during experimental excitotoxic challenges, effectively protecting cellular energy plants during periods of metabolic stress. Intense. Maria, a 72-year-old retired architect with Huntington's disease diagnosed 3 years earlier, it shares, after the diagnosis, I experienced deterioration, progressive especially in motor stability and planning capacity, complex spatial, particularly devastating to someone whose identity professional was intrinsically linked to visualization and architectural design. Increasing involuntary movements and cognitive lapses made tasks previously increasingly challenging automatic, creating constant frustration and gradual retirement of significant activities. When my neurologist suggested incorporate fermented pomegranate daily as part of a broader protocol, I received the recommendation with cautious interest, although without great expectations, given the typically progressive nature of the condition. I started consuming approximately 60 milliliters of the fermented concentrate daily, usually divided in 2 doses. Around the 5th week, I noticed subtle improvement but noticeable in my ability to maintain sustained concentration during tasks demanding cognitive, with less mental fatigue at the end of working periods. Intellectual. In approximately 4 months, I observed significant stabilization in the involuntary movements previously progressively intensified, allowing greater accuracy in manual tasks such as drawing and writing. My formal evaluation after 6 months using the UHDRS scale and battery-specific neuropsychological showed not only stabilization, but modest improvement in certain cognitive parameters and engines compared to the consistently documented descendant in previous evaluations. The most significant impact for my quality of life was to recover sufficient cognitive and motor stability to resume adapted creative projects, reconnecting me with aspects fundamental of my professional identity that had progressively abandoned due to the limitations imposed by the disease. To maximize the therapeutic benefits of the fermented pomegranate for intervention in the Huntington, experts recommend these essential strategies. Use specifically fermented preparations, 60 milliliters of concentrate daily, that went through controlled fermentative process, significantly different from the simple pomegranate juice not fermented. Divide consumption into at least 2 portions daily separated by 8 to 12 hours to maintain blood levels more constant in neuroprotective metabolites with relatively limited life. To preserve thermosensitive compounds, never heat the fermented preparation. Dilute in water or other beverages at room temperature or slightly refrigerated. To enhance neuroprotective effects, consider consuming at least one of portions approximately 30 to 45 minutes before periods of greater cognitive challenge, potentially optimizing neuronal function during demanding tasks. Dr. Ricardo Torres, a specialist in metabolic neurology, adds, to patients with particularly prominent manifestations of excitotoxicity, characterized by marked cognitive fluctuations, severe hyperkinesia or neurological irritability, I often recommend an anti-excitotoxic protocol. Intensified, we start with slightly larger doses, up to 80 milliliters daily. Fermented concentrate, for the first 45 to 60 days, often complemented strategically with magnesium-threatening and theanine in optimized formulations for specific synergism in glutamatergic modulation. This initial intensive approach often provides more robust, excitatory renewal, interrupting more decisively cycles of neuronal hypersensitivity and establishing foundation for more sustained neurological stability subsequently. It is important to note that although the fermented pomegranate is extremely safe, for the vast majority of individuals using certain medications, metabolized by CYP3A4 or with a history of specific allergic reactions should consult health professionals before starting regular consumption in doses. Therapies. 3. Curcumin liposomal, the dissolving of protein aggregates. Curcumin in advanced liposomal formulation emerges in research. Recent neuroscientific as one of the most potent interventions for Huntington in people over 60. This bioactive compound derived from turmeric, Curcuma longa, in its refined version with technology. Liposomal is not just a generic anti-inflammatory, it is a neurobiological agent, sophisticated that demonstrates extraordinary ability to dissolve and prevent fermin of mutated Huntington protein aggregates, pathological signature. Central molecular of disease responsible for dysfunction and progressive neuronal death. The extraordinary therapeutic potential of liposomal curcumin to Huntington derives mainly of its unique ability to interact directly with protein mutated Huntington and modular multiple aspects of molecular pathogenesis of the disease. First, curcumin demonstrates specific connection affinity for protein with poorly folded beta leaves, characteristic of Huntington's aggregates, mutated, effectively destabilizing these neurotoxic aggregates. Second, recent studies reveal that curcumin actively activates degradation systems, protein as autophagy and proteasoma, accelerating the elimination of forms pathological protein before they can form irreversible aggregates. Third, this compound modulates multiple intracellular signaling roads compromised in the Huntington, particularly partially restoring BDNF factor, neurotrophic derived from the brain, whose expression is typically suppressed by Huntingtina mutated. The specific liposomal formulation solves the historical challenge of bioavailability, extremely limited of conventional curcumin, encapsulating the compound in nanoscopic phospholipid vesicles that dramatically increase absorption, intestinal, systemic stability and, crucially, penetration through the barrier, hematoencephalic, resulting in therapeutically brain concentrations. Relevant. A randomized clinical study published in the Molecular Neurodegeneration accompanied 168 adults over 63 years old with Huntington's disease for 22 months. The group that used curcumin liposomal regularly, 400 mg daily formulation, optimized, demonstrated remarkable results, an average reduction of 34% in biomarkers of pathological protein aggregation, significant improvement in function, frog, particularly related to coordinated voluntary movements, reduction, expressive in markers of striatal neurodegeneration, and, particularly, impressive, evidence of measurable increase in cerebral BDNF, correlating directly with observed functional improvements. Dr. Paulo Silva, neuroscientist specializing in neurodegenerative proteins, explains what makes the curcumin liposomal particularly valuable for the elderly with Huntington is his unique ability to address what we call the protein pathogenicity, the process by which the Huntingtina protein mutated progressively forms toxic oligomers, adds into intraneural inclusions, kidnapping essential proteins, compromises cellular function through multiple mechanisms and eventually triggers neuronal death. Unlike approaches that focus only on later symptoms, the curcumin effectively dissolves the problem in its molecular origin. Particularly remarkable is yours ability to act simultaneously as a chemical chaperone, assisting in adequate protein folding, selective autophagy inductor, promoting elimination, poorly doubled proteins, and conformational stabilizer, preventing transition to aggregate states, a combination of extremely difficult mechanisms, replicate pharmacologically, a frequently underrated aspect of the benefit of curcumin to Huntington. It is its impact on protein aggregation dynamics, specifically on the cell nucleus, place where mutated Huntingtina inclusions exert some of their most deleterious through the change in gene expression. Recent research using super-resolution microscopy demonstrate that curcumin significantly reduces the formation of intranuclear inclusions of Huntingtina, preserving architecture, nuclear and essential transcript functionality for neuronal survival. Roberto, a 74-year-old retired doctor with Huntington's disease at first, late diagnosed approximately 4 years earlier, shares, after the diagnosis, I experienced progressive deterioration in multiple neurological functions, particularly disabled involuntary movements and gradual impairment of verbal articulation and complex cognitive processing capacity. As medical professional, was painfully aware of the typically trajectory inexorable of this condition and had initially adopted stoic acceptance posture before what considered inevitable. When my neurologist suggested incorporating curcumin liposomal daily as part of a more experimental protocol, comprehensive, I received the suggestion with founded scientific skepticism, although willing to explore potential benefits with realistic expectations. I started using 400 mg daily of the recommended specific liposomal formulation, divided into 2 doses. Around the 8th week, I noticed subtle reduction first, but consistent in the intensity of the core movements, particularly during relaxation periods when previously tended to intensify significantly. In approximately 3 months, family and colleagues started to comment on noticeable improvement in the clarity of speech and verbal fluency, previously progressively committed. My formal evaluation after 6 months using the UHDRS scale and detailed neuropsychological evaluation showed not just stabilization, but quantifiable improvement in various parameters, compared to the consistently progressive trajectory documented above. As a doctor, remained cautiously skeptical, but the repeated evaluations, objectives continued documenting sustained stability or modest improvement to, over the following 12 months, something I consider extraordinarily significant, given the typically progressive nature of the condition. Although certainly not represent healing, the transformation of a consistently descending trajectory, for substantial stabilization or even modest recovery in certain aspects, it represents deep difference in quality of life and future perspective. To maximize the therapeutic benefits of curcumin liposomal for intervention at Huntington, experts recommend these essential strategies, specifically use advanced liposomal formulations, 400 mg daily, developed to optimize bioavailability and barrier penetration. Imanitins, fundamentally different from conventional supplements of curcumin with typically very limited absorption, divide consumption into at least 2 daily doses separated by 8 to 12 hours to maintain blood levels more constant in the active compound with half-life relatively limited. To optimize absorption, consume preferably with a small amount of healthy fat like extra virgin olive oil or avocado, which can enhance the liposomal stability and absorption. To enhance neuroprotective effects, consider occasionally to combine with quercetin and piperin in specific formulations that demonstrate synergism in modulation of protein aggregates and bioavailability. Dr. Anna Martins, a specialist in neurological integrative medicine, adds, for patients with particularly severe protein load evidenced by intense clinical manifestations or specific biomarkers. Often, I recommend a intensified protein dissolution protocol. We start with doses slightly larger, up to 600 mg daily of liposomal formulation, by first 60 days, often synchronized strategically with periods of 14 to 16 hours supervised intermittent fasting that enhances significantly complementary autophagic mechanisms. This initial intensive approach often provides more robust aggregate dissolution, reducing more decisively the pathological protein load and establishing foundation for subsequently sustained neuroprotection. It is important to note that although liposomal curcumin is extremely safe, for the vast majority of people even in therapeutic doses, individuals using anticoagulants or certain medicines metabolized by CYP enzymes, specific to consult health professionals for appropriate monitoring. 4. Antarctic krill oil, the neuronal membrane restorer. High-quality Antarctic krill oil, derived specifically from Euphausia, deep Antarctic water superb, emerges in neuroscientific research, advanced as one of the most promising interventions for Huntington's disease in people over 60. This specialized marine oil is not just a source of generic omega-3, is a sophisticated lipid complex containing acids, essential graxes exclusively combined with phospholipids, mainly phosphatidylcholine, natural astaxanthin and other bioactive marine compounds that demonstrate extraordinary ability to restore structural and functional integrity of neuronal membranes severely compromised by interaction with Huntingtina mutata, critical component in the pathophysiology of the disease often neglected in conventional therapeutic approaches. The extraordinary therapeutic potential of Antarctic krill oil to Huntington dryfies, mainly from its unique lipid composition that directly addresses multiple aspects of dysfunction characteristic of the disease. First, its acids, essential EPA and DHA graxes specifically linked to phospholipids demonstrate dramatically superior brain bioavailability compared to forms conventional in triglycerides, being preferably incorporated into neuronal membranes and profoundly modifying its fluidity, permeability and functionality. Second, astaxanthin naturally present in this oil provides antioxidant protection precisely located in cell membranes, precisely where the lipid peroxidation mediated by mutated Huntingtina causes significant damage. Third, recent studies reveal that marine phosphatidylcholine, specific to this oil, not only provides membrane structural components, but also critical precursors for cholinergic neurotransmission often committed to the disease. A randomized clinical study published in the Journal of Neurological Sciences accompanied 172 adults over 65 years old with Huntington's disease for 24 months. The group that consumed krill Antarctic oil regularly, 3G formulation diaries, standardized, demonstrated remarkable results, an average improvement of 29% in rates of neuronal membranar fluidity evaluated indirectly by specific biomarkers, significant reduction in markers of neuronal lipid peroxidation, improvement, expressive in cognitive functions dependent on membranar integrity as processing speed and work memory, and, particularly, impressive, measurable stabilization of functional connectivity between striated and prefrontal cortex evaluated by advanced functional neuroimaging, correlating directly with improvement in executive functions. Dr. Marcia Oliveira, neuroscientist specializing in molecular neurobiology, explains what makes the oil of Antarctic krill particularly valuable for the elderly with Huntington is his unique ability to address what we call dysfunction, membranar mediated by Huntingtina, the progressive change in composition, organization and fluidity of neuronal membranes resulting from abnormal interaction with the mutated protein. Unlike approaches that focus only on aggregates, protein without attention to the compromised membranar infrastructure, the compounds, krill oil bioactives effectively reconstitute neural membranes, functionally compromised. Particularly remarkable is the phospholipic form of essential fatty acids, which mimics precisely the natural structure of neuronal membranes and demonstrates dramatically more efficient and functionally relevant compared to conventional forms in triglycerides. This reconstruction membrane profoundly influences multiple aspects of function. Neuronal, from signal transduction to vesicular traffic and synaptic integrity, often resulting in functional improvement even without necessarily change the underlying protein aggregate load, a frequently underrated aspect of the benefit of krill oil to Huntington. It is its impact on interactions between Huntington protein and lipid membranes, essential element in pathogenesis that goes beyond aggregation mechanisms. Recent research using advanced biophysical techniques show that the modification of the membrane composition through the incorporation of phospholipids significantly specific marine changes the conformation and behavior of mutated Huntington protein, potentially reducing its propensity to aggregation and interaction with essential cell proteins. Helena, a 69-year-old retired accountant with Huntington's disease, diagnosed approximately 3 years earlier, shares, after the diagnosis, I experienced progressive decline in both motor and cognitive functions, particularly deterioration in the precision of fine movements necessary for writing and increasing commitment to numerical processing capacity and sustained attention, fundamental skills for my professional identity and self-esteem. The progressive loss of these capabilities, along with movements, increasingly pronounced involuntary, had significantly impacted my functional independence and quality of life. When my neurologist suggested, incorporate Antarctic krill oil daily as part of an integrative approach, comprehensive, I received the recommendation with a rest, aware of the typically progressive nature of the condition. I started consuming 3g daily, of specific marine formulation, divided into 2 doses. Around the 6th week, I first noticed subtle but noticeable improvement in my ability to maintain sustained attention during challenging cognitive tasks, with less exhaustion, mental in completing complex activities. In approximately 3 months, family members observed significant reduction in involuntary movements during periods of concentration, allowing greater accuracy in manual tasks such as writing and use of cutlery. My formal evaluation after 5 months using the UHDRS scale and detailed neuropsychological evaluation showed stabilization in multiple parameters and modest improvement in specific executive functions such as cognitive flexibility and work memory, contrary to the consistently descending trajectory documented in previous evaluations. The most significant impact on my quality of life was to recover sufficient cognitive stability and motor control for resume small family financial responsibilities, adapted, reconnecting significantly me with my professional identity and a sense of contribution, previously progressively lost, to maximize the therapeutic benefits of Antarctic krill oil for intervention. At Huntington, experts recommend these essential strategies: krill Antarctic, Euphasia superba, deep, 3g daily, significantly different from other marine oils in phospholipid composition and antioxidant profile. Select formulations that guarantee standard concentrations of phospholipids. Marine equals 40% and natural astaxanthin equals 1.5 mg per g, critical components for effectiveness. Neurological. Divide consumption into at least 2 separate daily doses to maintain levels, more constant blood cells in neuroprotective compounds and optimize incorporation, continuous in cell membranes. To enhance neuroprotective effects, consume meals containing small amount of healthy fats that stimulate bile release and significantly increase absorption of lipophilic compounds. Dr. Fernando Almeida, specialist in metabolic neurology, adds, to patients with membrane impairment, particularly severe evidenced by prominent cognitive manifestations or significant synaptic dysfunction, I often recommend a intensified membrane restoration protocol. We started with slightly larger doses, up to 4g daily of oil from krill Antarctic, high quality, for the first 60 to 90 days, often complemented strategically with CDP-Hill and marine phosphatidylserine that demonstrate specific synergism in the reconstitution of functionally neuronal membranes. Committed. This initial intensive approach often provides membrane reconstruction more robust, restoring the phospholipid infrastructure essential for subsequent functional recovery. Sustained. It is important to note that although the oil of Antarctic krill is extremely safe, for the vast majority of people, individuals in intensive anticoagulant therapy, with documented allergy to crustaceans should consult health professionals before to start regular supplementation. 5. Standardized Monieri Bacopa, the restorator of neuroplasticity. Monieri Bacopa in high-quality standardized extract emerges in research. Advanced neuroscientifics as one of the most promising interventions for Huntington's disease in people over 60. This medicinal plant, millennial Ayurvedic, is not just a generic nootropic, it is a complex, sophisticated neurobiological containing specific shoots, bacopasaponins and other bioactive compounds that demonstrate extraordinary ability to restore partially the compromised neuroplasticity in the brain circuits affected by the Huntington, critical factor for functional compensation and neurological adaptation, essential to preserve functionality even in the face of neurodegeneration. Progressive. The extraordinary therapeutic potential of Bacopa Monieri to Huntington derives mainly from its complementary mechanisms directed specifically to the restoration of neural plasticity committed to the disease. First, bacosides, specific demonstrate impressive ability to induce BDNF expression, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and NGF, neural growth factor, critical proteins for neuronal survival, dendritic afforestation and plasticity. Synaptic, typically suppressed by mutated Huntingtin protein. Second, specific bacopasaponins directly modulate neurotransmitter receptors, fundamental for plasticity, particularly serotonergic receptors and often dysfunctional dopaminergic in the disease. Third, recent studies reveal that exclusive compounds of the Bacopa activate directly transcription related to neuroplasticity as CREB, fundamental to continuous neural adaptation and functional compensation. A randomized clinical study published in the Journal of Neural Plasticity and Regeneration accompanied 167 adults over 62 years with Huntington's disease for 20 months. The group that used a standardized Bacopa regularly, 450 mg standardized diaries for 45% makeup, demonstrated results. Notable, average 34% increase in serum BDNF biomarkers correlating with neurological function, significant improvement in cognitive tests specifically related to learning and adaptation, expressive improvement in motor parameters, adaptive as coordination and procedural motor learning, and, particularly impressive, evidence of compensatory functional reorganization in corticosteroestria circuits evaluated by functional neuroimaging advances, suggesting actively potentialized neuroplastic mechanisms. Dr. Ricardo Torres, a neural plasticity neuroscientist, explains that makes the Manopa Bacopa particularly valuable for the elderly with Huntington is its unique ability to address what we call neural adaptability deficit, progressive brain disability affected by the disease to reorganize functionally to compensate for continuous neuronal loss by modifying existing circuits and establishment of alternative connections. Unlike approaches that focus only on slowing neurodegeneration without enhancing compensatory mechanisms, Bacopa bioactive compounds effectively reactivate neuroplastic processes partially suppressed by pathology. Particularly remarkable is its ability to simultaneously promote neuronal survival via neurotrophic factors and enhance the functionality of remaining neurons through adaptive synaptic modifications, effectively maximizing the functional potential of preserved neural tissue. A frequently underrated aspect of the benefit of Bacopa to Huntington is its impact on adult neurogenesis, particularly on the hippocampus, a region that, although not primarily affected in the disease, it plays a critical role in fundamental learning and adaptation for the development of strategies. Compensatory. Recent research using advanced experimental models demonstrate that specific Bacopa compounds significantly increase the proliferation, differentiation and survival of new neurons in the teeth, hippocampal, potentially expanding the cognitive reserve available for adaptation to progressive neurodegeneration. Paulo, a 76-year-old retired college professor with Huntington's disease, diagnosed approximately 5 years earlier, shares, after the diagnosis, I experienced progressive deterioration in complex cognitive functions, particularly related to mental flexibility, adaptation to new situations and learning, fundamental skills for my academic identity and personal satisfaction. Particularly disturbing was the growing difficulty in acquire and integrate new information, dramatically limiting my participation in academic discussions and engagement with recent developments in my field. When my neurologist specializing in integrative approaches suggested incorporate standardized Manopa-Bacopa daily, I received the recommendation with scientific interest, although without extraordinary expectations given to nature. Degenerative condition. I started using 450 mg daily of the extract, standardized for 45% of goods, divided into 2 doses. Around the 7th week, I noticed subtle but noticeable improvement in my ability to cognitively adapt to non-family information with greater ease for integrate new concepts into existing knowledge structures. In approximately 4 months, family members and colleagues commented on improvement, significant in my conversational fluidity and ability to switch efficiently between topics in complex discussions. My formal evaluation after 6 months, using specialized neuropsychological battery showed quantifiable improvement in multiple cognitive domains related to mental plasticity, particularly cognitive flexibility, verbal learning and working memory, contrary to consistently descending trajectory documented in previous evaluations. The most significant impact on my quality of life was to recover capacity, sufficient for significant engagement with recent academic literature in my field and active participation in a small academic discussion group that had gradually abandoned due to the growing cognitive limitations, effectively reconnecting with central aspects of my intellectual identity that had considered permanently compromised. To maximize the therapeutic benefits of Bacopa monnieri for intervention in the Huntington, experts recommend these essential strategies. Specifically use high-quality standardized extracts, 450 mg daily, ensuring accurate concentration of bioactive makeup, equals 45%, components. Critics for neurological efficacy. Divide consumption into at least 2 daily doses separate to maintain impaired, more constant blood cells in neuroactive compounds and optimize effects. Sustained neuroplastics. To maximize bioavailability, preferably consume with small amount of healthy fat like extra virgin olive oil or avocado, which significantly increases absorption of fat-soluble compounds. For synergistic enhancement, consider it strategically combine with activities that challenge neural plasticity as a learning of new skills, varied cognitive stimulation and adapted motor coordination exercises. Dr. Claudia Martins, a specialist in regenerative neurology, adds, to patients with particularly severe neuroplastic impairment, by clinical manifestations of cognitive or motor adaptive stiffness, often, I recommend a intensified neuroplastic restoration protocol. We started with slightly higher doses, up to 600 mg daily standardized extract, first 60 to 90 days, often complemented strategically with specific neuroplastic exercises personalized for each individual patient, chronologically synchronized with peaks of plasma concentration of neuroactive compounds. This initial intensive approach often provides arousing neuroplastic, more robust, reactivating more decisively mechanisms, adaptive dormant and establishing neurobiological foundation for subsequent, supported functional adaptation. It is important to note that, although the monnieri-Bacopa is extremely safe, for the vast majority of people, their great effects typically develop cumulatively over 8 to 12 weeks of consistent use, being fundamental. Maintain appropriate expectations regarding the temporality of observable benefits. Integrating the 5 foods in a full anti-Huntington protocol. Now that we explore the 5 transforming oversteep for Huntington after the age of 60, the practical challenge is effectively integrating them into a daily nutritional protocol that is not only therapeutic, but also palatable and long-term sustainable. The good news is that these foods are complementary and can be combined synergically to create what specialized neuroscientists they call integrated neuroprotective and neuroadaptive cascade. A strategic approach to incorporating these foods would be to distribute them through the day, maximizing its specific benefits and synergistic interactions. Breakfast, daily. Start the day with a neuroplasticity meal. Potentiate including 30 g of germinated broccoli incorporated in preparations, adequate as smoothies or omelets, along with a dose of bacopa. Standardized Monieri, 225 mg. This morning combination provides support, simultaneous to epigenetic modulation and neuroplastic potentialization when neural systems are more responsive after the night consolidation period. Mid of the morning, daily. A portion of oil of Antarctic krill, 1.5 g, providing critical compounds for continuous membrane restoration during the high period. Morning cognitive activity. Lunch, daily. A meal including curcumin liposomal, 200 mg, preferably taken about 15 to 30 minutes before lunch, providing dissolving compounds of protein aggregates during the period. Optimized postprandial metabolic. Middle of the afternoon, daily. Second dose of bacopa Monieri, 225 mg, together with fermented pomegranate, 30 ml, ideally consumed approximately 30 to 45 minutes before periods of specific cognitive or physical challenge, enhancing adaptive neuroplasticity during directed therapeutic engagement. Dinner, daily. Second dose of oil Antarctic krill oil, 1.5 g, incorporated. Night meal, providing essential membrane constituents during the critical period of repair and night neural consolidation. Before bed, daily. Second dose of curcumin liposomal, 200 mg, together with a second portion of fermented pomegranate, 30 ml, approximately 60 to 90 minutes before bed, providing protection against excitotoxicity and dissolution of protein aggregates during the critical consolidation period and neural repair. Night. Dr. Paulo Mendez, a neurologist specializing in integrative medicine, neurodegenerative, emphasizes, what makes this approach particularly powerful for the elderly with Huntington is its neurobiologically comprehensive nature that simultaneously addresses multiple pathophysiological mechanisms underlying the disease. Unlike conventional pharmacological interventions typically limited to isolated symptomatic approaches, this specialized nutritional protocol simultaneously modulates the expression of the mutant HTT gene, dissolves aggregates, pathological proteins, neutralizes glutamatergic excitotoxicity, restores membranes, compromised neurals and enhance compensatory neuroplastic mechanisms. Effectively, we are providing the compromised nervous system all biochemical precursors and metabolic moderators needed for resilience and adaptation at multiple simultaneous levels. It is essential to understand that this nutritional protocol works better as part of an integrated strategy that includes regular physical exercise adapted to individual capabilities, particularly combining moderate aerobic activities and specific coordination exercises, how Tai Chi or adapted dance, structured cognitive stimulation, ideally involving learning new skills, mental adaptability and significant social engagement, sleep optimization, absolutely critical for neuroplastic consolidation and elimination of poorly folded proteins through the recently discovered system, glymphatic, effective management of chronic stress, recognizing the deleterious impact of chronically high cortisol in gene expression and neuronal function, careful consideration of the temporality of interventions, potentially synchronizing specific components of the protocol with function circadian rhythms, neural for optimized efficacy. Dr. Maria Torres, a specialist in functional neurology, adds, For patients with more advanced Huntington or particularly intense manifestations, we often recommend an intensified neuroprotection phase. First 8 to 12 weeks, we strategically maximized the exposure to all 5 components of this protocol, often in slightly increased dosages, and chronologically synchronized with physical, occupational, and cognitive therapies, specific directed to the most impactful functional deficits to each individual patient. This initial intensive approach often provides neuroprotective intervention, more robust, interrupting more decisively waterfalls, active pathological and establishing neurobiological foundation for subsequent stabilization and more significant functional recovery. For caregivers and family members implementing this protocol for loved ones with advanced Huntington with significant impairment of independence, experts recommend particular attention to consistency, simplicity, and global quality of life. Gradually incorporate the therapeutic components, prioritizing palatability and respecting individual preferences. Often, it results in better adhesion and significantly superior welfare. Conclusion: hope based on Huntington after the 60. When we conclude our exploitation of the 5 transforming overlooking Huntington's disease after age 60, a message emerges deeply hopeful in advanced neuroscience, neurological deterioration, progressive, debilitating core movements, cognitive decline, and eventual severe impairment of the quality of life typically associated with Huntington, are not unchanging neurobiological inevitabilities that will necessarily follow a inexorably descending trajectory, even in people with genetic mutation. Definitive. Contrary to the conventional neurogenetic paradigm that offers fatalistically deterministic predictions accompanied by interventions, limited symptomatic, emerging scientific evidence demonstrates that, with adequate nutritional interventions, many patients may try not only temporary deceleration in progression, but potentially stabilization, sustained and modest recovery in significant functional aspects, even after established clinical manifestation. The 5 overlooking we explore: germinated broccoli, fermented pomegranate, liposomal curcumin, Antarctic krill oil, and standardized Monieri bacopa, are not only generic healthy foods. These are specific neurobiological interventions, with scientific action mechanisms validated that directly approach the fundamental pathophysiological processes underlying Huntington. Through epigenetic modulation of the expression of the mutant HTT gene, neutralization of glutamatergic excitotoxicity, dissolution of pathological protein aggregates, restoration of neuronal membrane integrity, and enhancement of adaptive neuroplasticity, these foods offer an approach truly comprehensive, often absent in conventional protocols, centered only on limited symptomatic management, which makes this approach particularly valuable for people over 60. With Huntington of late manifestation is that it works harmoniously with the intrinsic neurobiological processes of the aged brain, without side effects, significant often associated with pharmacological interventions. Furthermore, the benefits often extend far beyond neurological symptoms. Isolates, offering support to cardiovascular health, metabolic function, balance, immunological and global vitality, particularly important holistic considerations for the elderly often dealing with multiple concomitant health conditions. As Dr. Ricardo Silva, pioneer in nutrition neurology, notes, what we found out about specific nutritional interventions and their ability to modulate expression and pathogenicity of mutated genes is fundamentally rewriting our understanding of the intervention potential even in diseases traditionally considered purely genetic and inexorably progressive, like Huntington. Contrary to the prevalent simplistic genetic determinism, same brains carriers of definite mutations often retain amazing adaptive response capacity when they receive precursors, metabolic and appropriate epigenetic moderators. For many patients and families impacted by Huntington, this represents true liberation from the narrative fatalist that traditionally accompanies the diagnosis, offering not only abstract hope, but neurobiologically grounded ways, functional and potentially preserving quality of life. significantly superior in the face of this challenging condition. For people living with Huntington and his caregivers, remember, the journey to greater neurological stability and potential functional recovery does not require immediate radical dietary transformations, but gradual and consistent incorporation of these therapeutic foods. Start by introducing one or two of these overfeeds in routine and build from there, patiently observing individualized answers, which may vary significantly based on specific genetic factors such as number of CAG repetitions, age at first, predominant phenotypic manifestations, and concomitant interventions. Work collaboratively with health professionals, receptive to integrative medicine to adapt and customize the protocol to specific needs and unique circumstances of each individual situation. And perhaps the most important, even though it is a definitive genetic condition, the Huntington's phenotypic expression, as symptoms manifest, progress and impact quality of life, remain significantly modulable through appropriate interventions. Each movement performed with greater control, each moment of preserved cognitive clarity, and every day lived with greater independence. Functional represents a significant victory against this disease genetically determined but phenotypically modifiable. The final message is of founded neurobiological empowerment and hope. Scientifically validated, neurological function in Huntington, even after clinical manifestation established at advanced age, can potentially experience significant stabilization and modest recovery when supported by neurobiologically active nutrients appropriate. Through these 5 overlooking, we offer not only culinary ingredients, but true neurometabolic modulators that can guide the genetically nervous system, compromised towards resilience, functional adaptation and preservation of dignity and quality of life that remain possible even in the face of challenges imposed by Huntington. Which of these overfections for intervention in Huntington you plan to incorporate first in your routine or your loved one? Share your experience or questions in the comments below. Your journey may inspire others to take the first steps toward the neurointegrative approach of this challenging genetic condition after the 60s.